A cowboy rides through the burning silence of the desert, only to find a black girl hanging from a tree, barely alive with a blood-red sign above her "White man, don't forgive." If that line gave you chills, smash the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe now, because what comes next will hit harder than a bullet in the dark. The sun was burning steady overhead, that kind of mean, blistering heat that peeled paint off a barn door and made a man question every step he took past noon. Calder Wyatt adjusted the brim of his hat and squinted toward the horizon. His horse, a stubborn gray with more dust than shine, moved slow through the baked earth. They'd been following a trail for half the day, a stray mare with a knack for slipping fences and disappearing into the scrub. It was quiet out here. Not peaceful, not exactly just the kind of silence that weighed on a man's chest. You got used to it when you'd been riding alone as long as Calder had. He liked it better that way. Folks had a way of saying too much or nothing useful. Out here, things made more sense. The sun rose, the wind blew, and if you didn't watch your footing, it killed you. Then he heard something. Not a clear sound. Not at first. More like a breath broke in half or the end of a cry someone forgot to finish. Calder stopped. His horse sat still, listened. The wind was up, but there was something beneath it, faint and wrong. He swung down, tied the reins to a low branch, and unshouldered his rifle just in case. The brush was thick in places, brittle mesquite and bone-dry juniper scratching at his sleeves as he picked his way through. His boots sunk soft in patches of red dust, then found rock again. He moved careful quiet. Every step tightened his gut. And then he saw her. She was hanging from a low limb of a cottonwood tree, arms stretched up, wrists bound cruel in a mess of dry rope. Her head hung forward, chin pressed to her chest. Skin dark, bruised, bloodied, burned where the sun had had its way. She wore nothing but rags that might have once been a dress torn and filthy. Her feet dangled, barely touching the ground, like someone wanted her to die slow. And above her, nailed to the bark, was a sign, sloppily scrawled in thick red paint. "White man, don't forgive." Calder stood there, eyes locked on the words. His mouth went dry. He didn't know what it meant exactly, but he knew hate when he saw it. The air got heavy, like the ground itself held its breath. He scanned the area. No sound, no tracks, just wind sifting through the trees. He lowered his rifle, took a step forward. The girl moved. Barely just a twitch in the arm, a slow tilt of the head like maybe she was still tethered to life by the thinnest string. He stepped closer, saw her wrists raw and swollen where the rope had bit through blood crusted in the hollows of her elbows, her lips cracked and caked with dirt. Calder's stomach turned. His voice was low, near gravel. "Christ almighty, what the hell they do to you?" He pulled his knife from the belt at his side. Hands didn't feel steady, not the way they usually did. Something about this girl, what they did to her, dug up a fear he couldn't name. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was just the wrongness of seeing a person hung like meat under the open sky. The knife slid under the rope. It resisted. He sawed once, then twice. Her body twitched. On the third cut, it gave way. She crumpled like a sack of wet bones, and Calder lunged forward just in time to catch her. She was light, far too light. Her body was hot to the touch, feverish and dry, like the desert itself had crawled inside her. He knelt with her in the dust, one arm under her back, the other reaching for his canteen. She didn't speak, didn't open her eyes, just breathed shallow and wrong. He wet a cloth, touched it to her lips. Her mouth moved, but no words came, only the faintest pull on his sleeve. "You're all right," he muttered. "You're safe now, least for the moment." He looked up at the sign again. Something cold slid down his spine. Calder wrapped her in his coat, careful not to jostle the worst of her wounds, and lifted her like she was made of glass. He didn't speak as he carried her to the horse. Didn't pray either. Just held her tight and climbed up, feeling the heat of her fever burning through the layers of cloth. The ride home was slow, long. The sun was on its way down by the time he saw the outline of his cabin, just a hunk of weathered pine and patched tin hanging on the edge of nowhere. A windmill groaned in the distance, and the barn leaned like it had known sorrow too long. Inside, the air was cooler. He laid her on the cot, moved quiet, like not to wake ghosts. She didn't stir. He got water from the basin, grabbed some clean cloth from the shelf, and began to work slow, careful, quiet. Her feet were bruised, ankles swollen. Rope burns wrapped her wrists like manacles. Her shoulders had red stripes, fresh and old. Her ribs stuck out hollow and sharp. Whoever did this hadn't just meant to kill her. They meant to break her first. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Calder said, mostly to himself. He cleaned the wounds one by one. Didn't look at her face too long, though he felt her eyes flutter now and again. Her chest rose shallow, her breaths dry as paper. When he was done, he wrapped her wrists in soft strips of linen, folded a blanket at her feet, and sat for a long time, elbows on his knees, eyes on the floor. "You don't deserve what they did to you," he whispered. "Ain't no way anybody deserves that." She didn't answer. He left her there, went to the barn to sleep. Couldn't bring himself to stay in the same room. Not yet. Didn't feel right. That night he sat on the porch with a tin mug of coffee gone cold, staring at the dark line of hills in the distance. Wind was up again, moaning soft through the fence posts. And for the first time in a long while, Calder Wyatt felt scared not of a man or a storm or death, but of what he'd found hanging beneath that cottonwood tree. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew hate. He'd seen it written in fire and blood, and it was writ clear on that girl's skin. The next morning he rose early, fire already crackling in the stove. He didn't hear her stir. She was still chest barely moving until he walked in and found her eyes dark, unfocused, staring toward the beam above her head like she wasn't sure it was gone. "You're awake," he said, and sat on the stool by the cot. Her gaze didn't leave the ceiling, but her mouth moved dry, quiet, like she had to remember how to speak. He poured a cup of water and held it to her lips. She sipped. Just a little, then more. When she looked at him, it wasn't trust. It was just a question. Why Calder shook his head slowly, voice low. "Didn't seem right leaving you up there?" Her eyes flicked down, noticed the bandages. She flexed her hands, once winced. She lay there for a long while, breath shallow, eyes blinking slow as if her mind was still somewhere else. Maybe back under that tree, maybe in the fire that scorched her skin, maybe deeper. Calder sat nearby, elbows on his knees, his hat in his lap. The room was quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy silence, the kind you don't dare break with small talk. The fire popped once in the stove. She flinched. "Easy," he said, softer than he meant to. "You're safe here." She didn't nod, didn't move much at all. Only her fingers tugged at the edge of the blanket he'd laid across her. Just a little twitch like she was testing if the warmth was real. Calder got up, crossed the room, and poured warm water into the basin. He dipped a clean cloth, wrung it out slow, then returned to her side. She didn't look at him, but she didn't pull away when he sat and pressed the cloth gently against her temple. Her skin was still too hot. The kind of heat that tells a man something inside ain't healing right. "You got a name?" he asked, not expecting much. Her lips parted. No sound. "That's all right," he said, looking down. "We'll get there when you're ready." He let the silence settle back in. She didn't blink, just kept her gaze near the ceiling like there was something up there she was afraid to forget. Days passed slow. The kind of days that don't announce themselves, just start with the sun sneaking in past the curtains and end when the sky fades into that dark purple only the desert seems to know how to paint. She lay still most days, barely shifting on the cot, unless the wind stirred too loud or the light caught her eyes just right. Her face had color again a little, though her skin still looked like it had come through too much sun and not enough kindness. Calder watched from the far side of the room, sitting quiet, never pressing. He brought her food, nothing fancy, beans, soft bread, some boiled potatoes when he had 'em. Most times, she barely touched it. Nibbled, maybe. Took just enough to stay alive. She'd sip water when he left the cup close, but always waited till he stepped back. Every night, Calder rolled out his bedroll in the barn. It wasn't comfort that drove him out there. It was respect. A man didn't share a roof with someone so hurt without invitation. That kind of pain needed space, not presence. So he slept among the horses, rifle close, listening to the wind creak through the boards. The silence in the cabin was thick, but not cruel. She didn't speak, and he didn't make her. Words weren't what she needed. He just made sure the fire stayed lit, that the water stayed warm, and that every small thing she might reach for was already in arm's length. Sometimes she watched him when he wasn't looking. He caught her once in the corner of his eye, gaze soft but guarded, like she was trying to figure out if he was real or just another piece of bad luck waiting to fall. He never called her by a name, not yet. Didn't feel right to name someone who hadn't chosen to stay. Maybe it wasn't a decision at first, more like she didn't have the strength to leave. But days passed and her eyes stopped searching the door so much. She started reaching for her own cup of water, ate more than a few spoonfuls, sat up without him needing to lift her shoulders, and she watched him now, really watched. In the mornings, Calder would come in from the barn smelling like hay and horse sweat, set down the pail of water, and ask without asking how she was holding up. She never said much, but her eyes did the talking. And one afternoon, when he handed her a clean dress from the chest, old but soft, she just stared at it for a long while, then at him, then back at the dress. "You can change in here," he said, backing toward the door. "I'll be out by the fence." But she didn't answer, and he didn't expect her to. When he came back, she was wearing it. The dress was a little loose around the shoulders and hung past her knees, but it brought color back to her. He looked too long, maybe. She noticed. And for the first time, he saw her cheeks darken, not from bruising, but from heat. Later that day, he reached past her on the shelf for the tin cups, and their arms brushed. Just a second, just skin to skin. She stiffened, didn't pull away, but froze like time hiccuped. He did too. Their eyes met. He gave a quiet, "Excuse me," low and rough, like he'd swallowed the words. She nodded without looking at him again. But she didn't leave the room. At night, he still took to the barn, old habits and such. But she started keeping the lamp burning longer. Started setting out 2 cups, though only one got used. The silence wasn't lonely no more. It had become something shared. Then came the day she tripped. She'd gone out to fetch the linen off the line. Calder had been showing her which knots held best in desert wind. Her foot caught a crooked root, and she went down hard. He was at her side in seconds. "You all right?" he asked, kneeling. She nodded, eyes down. "Just my ankle," she whispered. He reached out, hesitating for a blink, then slipped one arm under her legs, the other around her back, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. She gasped, grabbed his shirt front. "I got you," he murmured. Her face was buried in his chest, and she stayed there longer than she needed. He walked her inside without saying more. When he set her down on the cot, their eyes met again. Closer now, breath on breath. Neither moved. Until she looked away, fingers clenching the blanket. After that, she didn't flinch anymore when he touched her wrist to change the bandages. Sometimes her fingers lingered on his hand a second too long. Once she brushed hair from her face and he reached up slow, tucked a stray curl behind her ear. She looked at him like he'd just cracked the earth open. Then came the day she stepped outside. It was late afternoon. The sky had a weight to it, that kind that comes before a storm, not from clouds, but from the quiet. Calder was coming in from the west, fence line dusty and sun-sore when he saw her. She stood just past the porch, barefoot arms wrapped round herself, the old blanket from the cot slung over her shoulders. Her legs wobbled some, but she stayed upright. She moved slow toward the edge of the yard, the dry dirt under her feet soft from the morning's shade. He didn't call to her, just watched. She knelt near the barn in a patch of earth swept bare by wind. She bent, picked up a stick and started to draw in the dust. After a few minutes, Calder walked closer, boots quiet. He didn't get too near, just enough to see what she'd made. A bird. Its wings stretched wide, surrounded by a crown of fire. The lines were jagged, drawn with purpose. Not just a picture, more like a mark, a memory. He crouched beside her, not speaking for a spell. Then gentle, he asked, "What's that mean?" Her voice came low, rasped from disuse. "Bird in fire," she said. He waited. "It's ours," she went on. "My family's sign. My father carved it on the doorway. My brother burned it into his rifle stock. It means we rise even if it burns." Calder stayed quiet. She took a breath, shallow but steady. "They didn't ask nothing. Didn't say we done wrong. Just came riding in at dawn." Her voice shook now, but she didn't stop. 4 men, faces wrapped in cloth. 2 of them wore the sheriff's star. We weren't armed, just my father and uncle had tools. The rest of us were sleeping. She swallowed hard and her hand clutched the hem of the blanket tighter. They lit the hay on fire first. The barn went quick. Then the shouts. My mama, she ran out screaming barefoot. They hit her. Didn't stop. Her voice caught again. She looked at the drawing in the dirt, not him. My brother tried to fight. They shot him through the chest. My cousin ran, didn't make it past the fence. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, though the tears hadn't come yet. Only the dry memory of him. They dragged my father into the square. Didn't let no one speak. Said nothing. Just tied the rope and kicked the box. The wind blew soft, stirring the dirt across the bird's wings. I was inside the root cellar, hiding. I heard every footstep, every scream. When it got quiet again, I crawled out. The ground was black. My home was ash. Her voice cracked then. They found me 2 days later, said I was the reason, that someone white had died in the next town over, said we were all guilty. She turned her head now slow until her eyes met his. There was no fire in them, just the weight of truth. They tied my wrists, said I was going to be a message, hung me on that tree and left me for the buzzards. Calder didn't look away. I didn't do nothing, she whispered. We didn't do nothing. We was just living. He reached forward, not sudden, just enough to press his hand in the dirt beside hers. He didn't speak, didn't offer sympathy, just let the weight of his silence sit beside her pain. After a while, she whispered, "Why'd you cut me down?" His eyes stayed on the dirt. Didn't feel right letting someone hang for nothing. She didn't look at him, but her shoulders eased just a fraction, like a rope loosening one knot at a time. The firelight danced across her face, catching the sharp lines of her cheekbones, the faint tremble in her lips. Calder felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy, watching his sister braid wildflowers into her hair. That memory stung sharp and unbidden, and before he could stop himself, the words spilled out. "My sister," he said, voice low, like he was afraid the desert might hear. "She was 16. Raiders came last spring. Folks said it was a band of colored men, maybe runaways, maybe not. I was out hunting too far to hear the screams, till it was too late." He paused, his fingers digging into the dirt. "Found her in the barn, crying. I could have gone in, could have fought. But I was scared. Hid till the smoke cleared. She was gone before help came." Ayana's eyes lifted dark and searching, holding his gaze like a blade testing its edge. He didn't look away. Couldn't. That guilt's been eating me ever since he said, "Every damn day." I see her face, hear her voice. Ain't no forgiving that. The silence stretched long, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Ayana's hand twitched like she might reach out, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned closer to the fire, her voice barely above the crackle. "My father named me Ayana," she said. "Means peaceful river. Said it was hope life flowing through a dry place. He thought it'd keep me safe." Her lips twisted, not quite a smile. Didn't. Calder nodded slow, like he was weighing her words against his own. "Ayana," he repeated, letting the name settle in his mouth, soft and heavy like river stones. "Suits you." She looked at him, then really looked, her eyes wide and unguarded for the first time. The firelight caught the dampness there, but no tears fell. They sat like that, close enough to feel each other's warmth, far enough to know the world still stood between them. Then, almost without meaning to, Calder leaned forward. Ayana didn't pull away. Their lips met, soft and hesitant, like two people who'd lost everything and were afraid to trust what was left. It wasn't a promise, wasn't a vow, just a moment where the desert didn't feel so big. When they parted, her hand rested on his arm, light but steady. They didn't speak again that night. Didn't need to. Something had taken root, quiet and deep, like a seed buried in cracked earth waiting for rain. The morning came heavy, the air thick with the kind of stillness that makes a man's skin prickle. Calder was up before dawn, his boots crunching on the frost-kissed dirt as he checked the fence line. The ranch was quiet, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. He'd slept in the barn again, giving Ayana the cot inside, but sleep hadn't come easy. That firebird she'd drawn still burned in his mind, its wings trapped in flames just like her. He was near the horse corral when he saw it, a boot print pressed deep in the dirt. Not his. Smaller, sharper, with a heel that spoke of military issue, not the worn soles of a rancher. His gut twisted. Someone had been here circling, watching. He squatted low, tracing the edge of the print with his finger, his eyes scanning the ridge beyond the barn. Nothing moved, just sagebrush swaying in the early breeze, but he knew better than to trust the quiet. By noon, the dust rose on the horizon, a thin ribbon curling against the pale sky. 3 riders approached their horses, kicking up grit as they neared the ranch. Calder stood by the porch, his rifle leaning against the rail, one hand resting easy on his belt. The lead rider wore a blue cavalry coat, gold braid faded but proud, his face hard under a low-brimmed hat. The other two were locals, rough men with canvas jackets and rifles slung across their backs, their eyes narrow with purpose. Calder Wyatt. The cavalryman called, reining in his horse. His voice was clipped official like he'd practiced it. "Depends who's askin'," Calder said, keeping his tone even, his eyes steady. "Lieutenant Harris, Fort Dryden. We're tracking a fugitive." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper yellowed at the edges. He leaned down from his saddle and handed it over. Seeing her, Calder took the paper, his fingers slow, deliberate. He already knew what he'd find. A rough sketch of Ayanna stared back at him. Sharp eyes, long hair, her face younger than it felt now. The words screamed in bold ink. Wanted. Dangerous. Murder and escape. Reward. $500. He folded the paper, handed it back, his face unreadable. "Ain't seen nobody like that. Just me and the goats out here." Harris leaned forward, his eyes narrowing like he could smell the lie. "You sure, Wyatt? She's a colored girl, small, quiet. Might be hurt hiding, maybe. Word is someone cut her down from a tree near Blackwater Draw." Calder shrugged easy as he could manage. "Heard about that tree. Ain't been that way in weeks. Nothing out there but jackrabbits and bad luck." The lieutenant studied him long and hard, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't say. The two locals shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their rifles. "She's trouble," Harris said finally. "Part of a group that killed settlers. If you're lying, Wyatt, you'll burn with her." Calder met his gaze unflinching. "If I see anything, I'll send word." Harris nodded once sharp, then turned his horse. The locals followed their eyes, lingering on the ranch house a moment too long. Calder watched them ride off the dust, settling slow behind them, but the weight in his chest didn't ease. They'd be back. Men like that always came back. Inside, Ayanna stood by the window, her silhouette still against the faded curtain. She'd heard every word, her hands knotted in the blanket draped over her shoulders. Calder stepped in, pulling off his hat and setting it on the hook by the door. "They came looking," he said, voice low. "Showed me a paper with your face on it. Said you're wanted for murder." Her eyes flicked to his sharp with suspicion like a deer caught in a clearing. She didn't speak, just waited, her breath shallow. "I told him I ain't seen you," he said. "Told him it's just me here." Ayanna's gaze softened, but only a little. "Why'd you lie for me?" she whispered, her voice dry as the desert outside. Calder stepped closer, not too close, just enough to feel the space between them shrink. "Because I couldn't save my sister," he said, the words rough like they'd been scraped out of him. "I was too scared then. Hid like a coward. I ain't making that mistake again." She held his gaze searching like she was trying to find the lie in him, but there wasn't one. Her shoulders sagged just a fraction, and she turned back to the window, her fingers tightening on the blanket. "They won't stop," she said, so quiet, he almost missed it. "They never do." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Then we don't stay." Her head turned quick, her eyes wide. "What south?" he said. "Across the border down to Mexico. Folks say there's places there where a person can live free, no matter their skin. No soldiers, no signs, no bounties." Ayanna's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at him like he was something she didn't dare believe in, like hope was a trap she'd fallen into before. "You'd go with me?" she asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with something softer, something new. Calder stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, not grabbing just there. "I ain't leaving you to face this alone," he said. "Not now, not ever." She didn't answer, not with words, but her fingers curled around his tight, like she was holding on to the only thing keeping her from sinking. The room felt smaller, the air warmer, like the world outside had paused to let them breathe. They stood there, hands clasped, the lantern flickering against the walls, casting shadows that moved like they were dancing to a song neither of them knew. By dusk, Calder was packing. He moved quiet, deliberate, stuffing jerky biscuits and a canteen into a worn saddlebag. Ayanna watched from the doorway, her hair braided back, her eyes steady now like she'd made up her mind. The ranch was just a shell now, a place that had held them for a moment but couldn't keep them safe. He tied the last strap, then looked at her. "Tonight," he said. "We ride tonight." She nodded, stepping forward, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She wore his old coat, too big for her frame, the sleeves rolled up. It made her look small but not weak. Never weak. "I'm ready," she said, her voice clear like a river finding its course. Calder slung the bag over his shoulder, his rifle in his other hand. The desert stretched out beyond the door, vast and unyielding, but for the first time it didn't feel like an enemy. It was just a road, and they'd walk it together. They stepped outside the stars, just starting to prick the sky, and saddled the horses in silence. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of sage, and something sharper like smoke far off. Calder glanced at Ayanna, her face lit by the faint glow of the lantern. She looked back, and for a moment they didn't need words. They had something better, trust hard-won and fragile, but enough to carry them south. The desert night was a blanket of stars, sharp and cold, stretching over the endless scrub and stone like a promise that could cut. Calder and Ayanna rode hard, their horses' hooves kicking up dust that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air was thick with tension, each shadow a threat, each gust of wind a whisper of pursuit. They didn't speak, didn't dare their breaths matching the rhythm of the gallop, their eyes scanning the dark for anything that moved wrong. The border was close, maybe 10 miles, but the desert didn't care about lines on a map, and neither did the men who hunted them. Calder kept his mare steady, one hand on the reins, the other near his rifle, his jaw tight with the kind of focus that comes when you know death's riding just behind. Ayanna was a shadow beside him, her horse lean and fast, her braid bouncing against her back. She rode like she was born to it, her body low, her eyes sharp, cutting through the dark like a blade. They'd left the ranch behind, no note, no fire, just a door swinging in the wind, a home turned to memory. The shot came sudden, a crack splitting the night like thunder too close. Calder jerked in the saddle, his body folding sideways, a sharp grunt escaping his lips as he hit the dirt hard. Blood bloomed dark through his shirt, soaking the side where his ribs met his hip. Calder Ayanna's voice was a raw scream, her horse skidding as she leaped down her boots, sinking into the sand beside him. "Keep going," he rasped, one hand clutching his side, the other pushing at the ground, trying to rise. His face was pale, his breath wet and uneven. "Go, Ayanna. Now. No." Her voice was steel, her hands already on him, pulling his arm over her shoulder. Another shot whizzed past, spitting dust where it struck a rock behind them. The ridgeline above flickered with movement, two figures, rifles glinting in the starlight, their horses pawing the ground. Calder groaned, his legs buckling, but Ayanna held him up her strength, surprising for her small frame. "We move," she said, her voice low, urgent, like she was commanding the desert itself. "You ain't dying here." Through sheer will, they stumbled toward a cluster of rocks, a narrow pass carved between two cliffs, barely wide enough for a man to slip through. Bullets cut the air, one grazing the stone above their heads, sending shards raining down. Calder's boots dragged his weight heavy against her, but Ayanna didn't falter. She half-dragged, half-carried him into the pass, the shadows swallowing them as the shots faded behind. The riders wouldn't follow, not through that maze of stone, not without risking their own necks. In the dark of the pass, Calder collapsed to his knees, blood dripping onto the dust, black in the moonlight. He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with pain, but sharp with something else. Wonder, maybe, or gratitude. "You said," he gasped each word, "a fight you wanted to be my wife." Ayanna knelt beside him, her hands cupping his face, her thumbs brushing the sweat and dirt from his cheeks. Her eyes were fierce, unyielding. "I still do," she said, her voice steady, like a vow carved in stone. The night pressed close, the air cool against their skin, but her words burned hotter than the wound in his side. Calder's lips curved a faint smile through the pain, and he reached for her hand, his fingers slick with blood, but strong. "Then we better make it through this," he whispered. Ayanna didn't answer, not with words. She tore a strip from her skirt, pressed it hard against his wound, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. In the silence, she prayed not to the god of the settlers with their crosses and beads, but to the spirits of her ancestors, the ones who walked the rivers and mountains before the world turned hard. She prayed for the fire in Calder's blood to hold, for the wind to carry them south, for their love to outlast the hate chasing them. The stars above watched, silent witnesses to a promise made in blood and shadow. They moved again, slower now, Calder leaning on her as they slipped through the pass. The border was close, the air changing softer somehow, like the desert was loosening its grip. By dawn, they'd crossed into Mexico, the line unmarked, but felt a weight lifting even as Calder's steps grew heavier. They found a hollow near a dry creek bed, a place where the rocks formed a shallow cave. Ayanna eased him down his back against the stone, his breath shallow but still there. She built a small fire, just enough to warm the air, and cleaned his wound with water from the canteen, her hands gentle but sure. For days, Calder drifted in and out of fever, his skin hot, his words mumbled and broken. Ayanna never left his side, washing the wound, spooning water between his cracked lips, whispering to him when the fever made him shake. The creek bed nearby began to trickle, a thin stream fed by some distant rain, and it felt like a sign, like the land itself was rooting for them. She'd sit by the fire at night, watching his chest rise and fall, her fingers tracing the edge of his hand, as if she could hold him to this world by touch alone. One night, when the fever finally broke, Calder opened his eyes clear for the first time in days. He looked at her, his voice a rough whisper. "You didn't leave." Ayanna's lips curved soft, almost a smile. "Told you I meant it." He reached for her hand, weak but deliberate, and they sat there, the fire crackling, the creek whispering their promises, holding stronger than the desert that tried to break them. Months slipped by like water over stones, quiet and steady, carrying them into a new life. On the southern edge of Mexico, where the land softened into mesquite groves and river bends, Calder and Ayanna built a home. It wasn't much a lodge of pine and hide, its roof slanted against the rain, its walls sturdy but plain. Reeds whispered around it, wildflowers nodding in the breeze, and a river ran close, its current slow and sure, like it had all the time in the world. Ayana sat under the lodge's awning, her legs crossed, her hands busy with a needle and a tiny white shirt. Her belly had rounded not much yet, but enough to feel the life stirring inside her, a flutter like a fish in deep water. She hummed softly, a tune her mother used to sing, the notes low and warm, carrying memories of a time before the world turned sharp. The cotton was soft under her fingers, the stitches even, each one a small act of hope. She was a river now, like her name, peaceful but strong, carving a path through stone. Beyond the lodge, Calder worked with a young Mustang, his voice low and patient, coaxing the horse to trust him. His shirt was rolled to his elbows, his hat tipped back, and every so often he'd glance toward the lodge. He'd catch Ayana's silhouette through the thin curtain, her head bent over her sewing, and a smile would tug at his lips, quiet but real, like he still couldn't believe she was there. The wound in his side had healed, leaving a scar that ached when the rains came, but he moved easy now, his hands steady, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Their life was simple, no riches, no grand plans, just the two of them and the land that held them. Inside the lodge, the walls were bare of trophies or pictures, just bundles of sage and lavender hanging to dry, a couple of worn books on a shelf, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. Ayana moved through it all like she was part of the place, her steps sure, her presence grounding like the river that gave the lodge its breath. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in pinks and golds, Ayana walked down to the river. The path was worn now, her bare feet knowing every root and stone. She stepped into the shallows, the cool water kissing her ankles, and laid both hands over her belly, feeling the soft curve under her woven sash. "Little one," she whispered, her voice blending with the current, "your daddy didn't just forgive, he loved, and he kept every promise." Behind her, footsteps rustled the grass, soft but familiar. Calder came to stand beside her, his boots left behind his toes sinking into the damp earth. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand, their fingers twining like they'd done it 1,000 times. The river moved before them, steady and quiet, reflecting the first stars blinking into view. They stood there, two souls who'd been hunted, who'd bled, who'd nearly lost everything, but who'd found each other instead. No one had expected them to make it this far. Not the soldiers with their warrants, not the locals with their hate, not even the desert that tried to swallow them whole. But they had, and in this small patch of earth, they'd built something real. Not the kind of love that gets written in books, but the kind that grows slow like a seed in hard ground and holds fast. The river kept flowing peaceful, like Ayana's name, like their life, like a home that was finally theirs. Hey friends, before we close this video, I just want to take a moment, not as a storyteller, but as a human being, to reflect on what this story really means. Ayana and Calder's journey isn't just about survival or forbidden love. It's a raw reminder of what hate can do and what love dares to undo. That tree she was hanging from, that wasn't just wood and rope. It was the weight of centuries of racism, of fear disguised as power, of silence louder than any scream. And yet, she survived. She didn't just survive, she found someone who saw her as a soul, not a skin. This story is about redemption, but more than that, it's about recognition. Calder wasn't a perfect man. He had regrets, pain he didn't speak of, and guilt that clung to his bones. But when it mattered, he made a choice to stand against the very thing he'd once been silent about. And that matters. that means something. We live in a world still carrying the wounds of racism, still trying to unlearn what never should have been taught. Stories like this remind us that it only takes one person to break the pattern, one act of compassion, one hand reaching down to cut the rope. So tell me what you felt. What did this story stir up in you? Did it remind you of anything, a moment in history, someone you know, maybe even yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it honestly, openly, like friends do. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it more than you know. Thanks for listening, truly. See y'all in the next one.